My wife filed for divorce after I lost my job. She didn't know my father-in-law secretly left me his $350 million fortune. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Ohio. I spent most of my life working hard, building a stable career, and trying to give my wife, Emily, the best life I could. For years, I believed our marriage was solid. We had been through struggles before, but nothing that ever shook the ground beneath us. I thought we were partners, bound together no matter what life threw our way. That belief came crashing down the day I lost my job. It wasn't because I was lazy or careless. The company I worked for downsized suddenly, cutting out entire departments. I had given more than a decade of my life to that place, and in one short meeting, I was told my position no longer existed. Walking out of that building for the last time felt like losing a piece of my identity. When I told Emily, I expected comfort, maybe a reassuring word, something to let me know we'd figure things out together. Instead, her reaction was different. She didn't say much at first, just a nod and a cold "we'll manage." But in the days that followed, her behavior began to change. The warmth I was used to, the small touches, the quiet jokes, the way she used to ask about my day, started to fade. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I tried to brush off her distance at first, telling myself she was just stressed. Losing my income was no small thing. But as the weeks went by, I couldn't ignore it anymore. She stopped eating dinner with me. She spent more time on her phone or out of the house. Conversations felt like chores to her. I would ask how her day went, and she would give me one-word answers. Whenever I tried to talk about my plans to get back on my feet, she dismissed me with a sigh or rolled her eye. I still believed we'd make it through. I told myself marriage was about standing together through highs and lows. I tightened my belt, sent out resumes, and stayed hopeful. But I could feel the gap between us growing wider every single day. It wasn't just about the money. It was something deeper, like she had already decided my worth was tied to my paycheck. It hurt in a way I didn't know was possible. I had loved Emily with everything I had, and now I felt like I was living with a stranger. All I wanted was a little patience, a little faith. Instead, I was met with coldness that only grew sharper as time passed. I didn't know it then, but losing my job was just the beginning of something much bigger. The unraveling of the life I thought I had built with. It didn't take long before the cracks in my marriage started to show. Emily no longer held back her frustration. She began to remind me, almost daily, that I wasn't bringing in money anymore. At first it came out as little comments, like asking how long it would take before I found something new, or pointing out bills that needed paying. But soon those comments turned into open criticism. She called me useless more than once, and she didn't even try to soften her. I tried not to argue. I told myself it was stress talking, that she was scared about the future, the same way I was. I kept sending out applications, showing her I was trying, but nothing seemed to matter. It was like she had already made up her mind about who I had become. Her time at home grew shorter too. She started staying late at work, claiming she had projects to finish or meetings that ran long. Some nights she wouldn't come home until I was already in bed. Other nights she'd walk through the door with barely a word, head straight to the shower, and then fall asleep without even asking how I was doing. I noticed she kept her phone close, always face down on the table. If I walked into the room, she'd lock it without thinking. The more distant she grew, the more I tried to close the gap. I cooked dinner, cleaned the house, and made an effort to keep everything running smoothly, so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I thought maybe if she saw how much I was still contributing, she'd ease up, and we could talk like we used to. But it didn't work. My efforts seemed invisible to her. The only comfort I had during that time came from her parents. Richard, her father, would call me just to check in. He told me not to lose hope, that I had always been a hard-working man, and he knew I'd land on my feet. His kindness meant more than he probably realized. Even her mother, though quieter, was supportive. She would send over meals sometimes, saying she didn't want us to worry about groceries. Richard, especially, went out of his way to remind me that setbacks happen to everyone. He said he admired the way I carried myself, not giving up even when things looked rough. Those words kept me steady when everything else around me felt shaky. At home, though, the tension with Emily only got worse. Every attempt I made to reach her felt like talking to a wall. She didn't laugh with me anymore, didn't share stories about her day, didn't look at me the way she once did. I was still holding on, still believing we could turn it around, but in the back of my mind, I was starting to realize something was slipping away that I might never get back. The truth finally hit me one evening when Emily came home later than usual. She went straight to the shower, like always, but this time she forgot her phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed while I was cleaning up, and the name that lit up the screen stopped me cold. Bradley. I knew the name. He was one of her co-workers, someone she had mentioned in passing before, usually in a casual way. Seeing his name appear so late at night made my stomach turn. I didn't snoop. I didn't open the message. But deep down, I already knew what it meant. The late nights, the phone turned face down, the distance in her voice. It all came together in one sickening realization. When she came out of the shower, I asked her straight out if she was seeing someone else. I expected her to deny it, maybe get angry that I even asked. But she didn't. She didn't even hesitate. She looked me in the eye and said, "Yeah, Bradley. At least he knows how to take care of a woman." I can't describe the way those words hit me. It was like being punched in the chest, except worse, because the pain wasn't physical. It went deeper. This was the woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built my life around, and she stood there mocking me like I was nothing. I asked her why. Her answer was simple, cruel, and sharp. "I need a real man, Daniel. Someone who can provide. You can't even hold a job." It was like the last piece of hope I had been holding on to shattered in that moment. I thought maybe her coldness was stress. Maybe she was just afraid of our future. But no, she had already moved on, already decided I wasn't enough. After that night, she barely spoke to me unless it was to throw another insult or to remind me of how Bradley treated her better. I stopped trying to reach her. I slept on the couch most nights, because being near her felt like sitting next to a stranger. Within weeks, the final blow came. I was served with divorce papers. She didn't come to me directly, she had them delivered. The papers demanded alimony and half of everything we owned. Reading through those pages felt like someone was stripping away not just my marriage, but the life I had built from the ground up. I sat there holding those papers, numb, while she walked around the house like nothing had happened. She had already moved her things into separate closets, already made plans for her new life. I realized then that I was no longer part of her future. I was just an obstacle she wanted to clear out of the way. That betrayal cut deeper than I thought I could endure. It wasn't just about losing my wife. It was about realizing she had never truly valued me beyond what I could provide. Walking into the courtroom for the first time felt like stepping into a place where the truth didn't matter. Emily sat across from me, dressed sharp and confident, her lawyer at her side. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look hurt. She looked like someone who had already won. Her lawyer wasted no time tearing me down. He called me a lazy, unemployed burden, someone who had failed to provide for his wife and left her no choice but to move on. He made me sound like a man who sat at home doing nothing while Emily carried the weight of everything. I wanted to stand up and defend myself, to explain that I had given years of hard work to my job before it was taken from me, but I knew it wouldn't matter. In that room, the picture her lawyer painted was all anyone seemed to hear. Emily sat there the whole time, calm, even smiling at moments. Once, when I looked up, I caught her smirking at me like this was some kind of game she had already won. That look burned into me more than her lawyer's word. It was the look of someone who had no love left, only contempt. I stayed quiet. My own lawyer spoke for me, tried to bring up my years of steady work and my efforts to find a new job, but it felt like the room was against me. Every time Emily's lawyer talked, it was like his words carried more weight. I sat there, listening to my name being dragged through the mud, feeling smaller with each sentence. The only comfort I had during those hearings was Richard. He showed up to every session, sitting quietly in the back. He never said much, but when I glanced his way, he gave me a small nod, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. That look meant more than I can explain. Knowing he still believed in me when his own daughter had turned her back gave me a kind of strength to sit through the humiliation. Emily didn't seem to notice her father's presence, or maybe she just didn't care. She was focused on the outcome, convinced she was about to walk away with everything. Her lawyer asked for alimony, half of our savings, even part of my retirement account. It was like she wanted to strip me down to nothing, to leave me with no chance of standing on my own again. I kept my composure, even when the words cut deep. I didn't lash out, didn't show anger. Maybe that was the only bit of control I had left, choosing not to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. By the end of it, I walked out of that courtroom feeling drained and hollow. The marriage was already dead, but sitting there while she tried to destroy what little I had left showed me just how far gone she really was. Not long after the divorce was finalized, I got a call that hit me harder than I expected. Richard had passed away. Even though he wasn't my father by blood, He had treated me with more respect and kindness than I ever imagined. The news left me sitting in silence, remembering every small way he had stood by me when no one else did. A week later, I was asked to attend the reading of his will. I went there thinking it was a formality, something meant for Emily and her family. I almost didn't go, figuring it wasn't my place anymore. But when the lawyer began reading, I realized how wrong I was. Richard had left his entire estate, every last cent, every property, every investment, to me. The number was almost too large to process. $350 million. I thought I had misheard at first, but the lawyer read it twice to be clear. The room went silent. Emily sat across the table, her mouth slightly open, waiting for someone to correct what had just been said. But then came the part that cut deeper than anything else. The will specifically named Emily, saying she was excluded. Richard's exact words were that she had abandoned her vows and did not deserve a penny of what he had built. I sat there stunned, unable to speak. The weight of what had just happened felt surreal. I had walked into that room expecting nothing, and instead I had been handed a fortune I couldn't even wrap my head around. But more than the money, it was Richard's faith in me that left me shaken. In his final act, he had chosen me over his own daughter. Emily's shock turned to rage almost instantly. She slammed her hand against the table and demanded answers. She shouted that it was unfair, that the money was supposed to be hers by right. Her face turned red as she accused me of manipulating her father, of somehow twisting him against her. The lawyer stayed calm, repeating that Richard's wishes were clear and legally binding. The more he explained, the louder Emily became. She refused to accept that her father had deliberately cut her out, that he had seen through her actions and left everything to the man she had tried to destroy. I didn't say a word. I sat there in silence, letting her anger spill out while the reality settled over me. She glared at me as if I had stolen something from her, when in truth it was her own choices that had cost her everything. Walking out of that office, I felt a storm of emotions: grief for Richard, shock at the inheritance, and a strange sense of justice. Emily had wanted to take half of everything I had, and now she was left with nothing while I carried the legacy her father trusted me with. It didn't take long after the will was read for Emily to show up at my door. She looked nothing like the woman who had sat across from me in court, smug and confident. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red from crying. She tried to step inside without waiting for me to invite her, but I blocked the doorway. "Daniel, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done what I did. I lost my head. We can fix this. We can make things right." Hearing her say those words almost would have meant something months ago. But standing there, watching her try to force tears, I felt nothing but a quiet, heavy calm. I let her talk. She went on about how she had been under pressure, how she hadn't realized what she was throwing away. She promised she still loved me, that she wanted to be with me again, that money didn't matter to her. But I could see through her performance. The timing was too perfect. She hadn't cared about me when I was on the couch searching for jobs. She hadn't cared when she packed her things and served me with papers. She only came back once she realized her father had left me everything. I asked her one question: "Are you still seeing Bradley?" Her face froze for a moment, just a flicker, but it told me everything I needed to know. She shook her head and said no, but the hesitation gave her away. Later that week, a mutual friend confirmed what I already suspected: she was still with him. She hadn't left him, not even after all of this. That knowledge didn't hurt me the way it might have before. Instead, it gave me clarity. This wasn't about regret. This was about desperation. She thought if she could worm her way back into my life, she'd get her hands on the inheritance. She kept trying, though. She called me over and over, left long voicemails about second chances and forgiveness. Once, she even showed up outside my office, crying loud enough to draw attention. But I didn't take the bait. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, and I didn't give her the satisfaction of a dramatic fight. Instead, I stayed composed. Every time she begged, I told her calmly, "Emily, you made your choice." That was all. No anger, no explanations, just the truth. Eventually, she stopped pretending to be sorry and showed her real side again. Her voice turned sharp, her words full of blame. She accused me of being cold, of being vindictive, of holding a grudge. But the truth was simple: I wasn't holding a grudge. I was finished. Watching her walk away for the last time, I knew she hadn't come back out of love. She came back because she thought she had lost something she deserved. And seeing her leave empty-handed was the clearest proof of all that I had made the right decision. With Emily finally gone, I turned my focus to what mattered most: building a life that honored the man who had believed in me when no one else did. Richard hadn't just left me money, he had left me a responsibility. I could almost hear his voice in the back of my mind, telling me to do something meaningful. The first thing I did was pay off debts I still carried from the divorce. Then, instead of buying flashy cars or a mansion, I sat down and thought about what Richard had cared about most. He had always been generous with his time and resources, often donating to local food banks and youth programs. So I followed his example. I began giving large donations to the same causes, making sure the money went to real people who needed help. From there, I looked for ways to create something lasting. I started businesses that gave opportunities to men and women who had lost their jobs like I once had. I hired people who had been overlooked, people others had written off as burdens. Watching them come in every day, grateful for a second chance, gave me more satisfaction than any material thing could. It didn't take long for word to spread. People in the community began to see me not as the man who lost everything, but as the man who rebuilt with purpose. They respected the way I carried myself, not flaunting wealth, but using it to lift others. I kept quiet about most of it, but word has a way of traveling fast. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about Emily and Bradley. Without the security she thought she'd gain, life wasn't as sweet as she had imagined. They were living in a small apartment, struggling to cover their bills. She had gone from planning a future filled with comfort to scraping by week to week. And as people learned more about Richard's will, the story of how she treated me spread too. Soon, Emily wasn't just dealing with financial struggles, she was dealing with shame. Neighbors whispered behind her back. Old friends pulled away. She had betrayed me for what she thought was a better life, only to watch me rise higher than she ever expected while she sank lower than she could have imagined. I never sought out revenge directly. I never confronted her or flaunted what I had. But life itself handed me the kind of justice I could never have planned. She had tried to strip me of dignity and leave me broken, but instead, she lost everything while I stood stronger than before. In the end, my revenge wasn't in anything I said or did to her. It was in the quiet way I carried on, building something lasting, while she became the example of what greed and betrayal lead to. The more I grew, the more invisible she became. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard a knock at my front door. It wasn't the polite kind of knock, it was hard and impatient. When I opened the door, Emily was standing there. Her face was tight with anger, not sorrow. She didn't even bother with greetings. She pushed past me and stormed into the living room as if she still had a right to be there. "You owe me," she said sharply, turning to face me. "That money should have been mine. You stole it. You know it." I stood still, keeping my voice calm. "Emily, you know that isn't true. Your father made his decision. I had nothing to do with it." Her voice rose as she pointed a finger at me. "He was my father. You tricked him somehow. That inheritance was meant for me, not for you. And now you're sitting here with millions while I'm left with nothing. It's disgusting." I let her words spill out, waiting until she was finished. Then I spoke slowly, making sure every word was clear. "Emily, you chose this. You chose Bradley. You chose divorce. You chose greed over loyalty. This was never yours." She froze for a moment. It was as if the words hit her harder than she expected. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out right away. She looked at me, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw something different in her eyes. Not anger, not pride, but the faint trace of regret. Still, she tried to fight it. "I only left because you couldn't take care of me," she said, her voice weaker. I thought he could give me more." I shook my head. "And that's the point. You measured love by what someone could provide. You didn't care about me when I was down, but your father did. He saw the truth, and that's why he left everything to me." The silence that followed was heavy. She looked around the room, maybe realizing how far away she was from the life she once imagined. For a moment, it seemed like she wanted to argue again, but her shoulders sank. I didn't yell. I didn't throw her out. I simply opened the door and said, "You should go, Emily." She stood there, caught between pride and the crushing weight of reality. Finally, she walked past me without another word. As the door closed behind her, I knew something had shifted. For the first time, she truly understood that what she had lost wasn't stolen from her. It was thrown away by her own hand. And in that quiet moment, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Just finality. The chapter with Emily was closed, not because I ended it, but because she had destroyed it herself. After Emily walked out of my house that evening, something inside me shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of betrayal start to lift. The anger, the humiliation, the endless replaying of what she had done, it all began to fade. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to her anymore. She had written her own ending, and I no longer had to carry it with me. In the quiet that followed, I thought about Richard, the man who had seen me for who I really was, even when his own daughter couldn't. He had trusted me with more than money. He had trusted me with his legacy. I began to see his decision not just as an inheritance, but as a kind of test. Would I waste it on revenge or selfishness? Or would I rise to the responsibility he believed I could handle? That thought shaped everything I did. I stopped looking back at what Emily had taken from me and started focusing on what Richard had given me. His faith pushed me forward. Instead of bitterness, I chose purpose. I poured my time into projects that mattered, businesses that gave people opportunities, donations that touched lives the way Richard once had. Every step I took was a way of honoring him, a quiet thank you to the man who had given me a second chance when I least expected it. As the months passed, Emily drifted further out of my life. At first, I would still hear about her through mutual acquaintances. They said she was struggling, that Bradley wasn't the man she thought he was. I didn't ask for details. It no longer mattered. The more I grew, the smaller she became in my world, until eventually she was just a name from another time, bitter and forgotten. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't feel joy at her misery. What I felt was distance, like she belonged to a past that no longer had any power over me. My life had taken on a new shape, one that wasn't defined by betrayal, but by strength and clarity. One evening, sitting in the home I had built for myself, I realized I was finally free. Not just from Emily, but from the pain she had left behind. The betrayal had once consumed me, but now it felt like a shadow that no longer reached me. Richard had trusted me to carry his legacy, and I was doing it. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with honesty and dignity. That was enough. Emily had lost me, her father's respect, and her chance at the life she thought she deserved. I had lost her, but in the end, I realized that wasn't a loss at all. It was a release. Losing everything showed me who people really are. Betrayal cut deep, but the inheritance wasn't the real gift. It was the clarity. I didn't just gain money. I gained freedom from someone who never truly loved me. When I look back now, I can see it clearly. The signs were always there, though I refused to see them. Emily tied love to comfort, loyalty to success, and respect to the size of a paycheck. When those things slipped away, so did she. At first, I thought losing her was the worst thing that could happen. But in truth, it was the best. Because once she was gone, I could finally see my life for what it was, not built on love, but on conditions I never agreed to. The money gave me the ability to rebuild, yes, but the real change came from inside. I no longer carried her judgment on my shoulders. I no longer lived with the pressure to prove I was enough. I was finally free to live a life defined by my own choices, not hers. I used that freedom to build something better. I invested wisely, not just for myself, but for others who needed a chance. I gave to causes that mattered, to people who reminded me of who I once was, struggling, overlooked, ready to give up. That was where I found meaning. Not in the numbers in a bank account, but in seeing people rise because someone believed in them. Emily faded into the background. I heard whispers now and then about how she was doing, but I didn't chase those stories. Her life no longer touched mine. I knew she carried regret, but that was hers to live with, not mine. She had chosen a path built on greed, and it had led her to emptiness. I had chosen to move forward, and it led me here. And here is enough. Here is peace. Here is dignity. If there's one thing my story taught me, it's that losing what you thought mattered most can be the doorway to something far greater. Pain strips away illusions, betrayal cuts out what is false, and when the dust settles, you are left with truth. And truth, though heavy, is freeing. I don't share this story for pity or for praise. I share it because maybe someone reading it feels like their world is falling apart too. Maybe you've lost someone or been betrayed or had everything taken from you. If so, hear this. What feels like the end can be the beginning. Because that's what it was for me. Losing my job, losing my wife, being dragged through the mud. It all cleared the way for me to find out who I really was. And what I found was stronger than I ever imagined. So yes, I lost Emily. But in losing her, I gained myself. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the money in the world.